Herzlich willkommen, ganz herzlich willkommen Ihnen allen, liebe Gäste. Wir haben Freunde der Fakultät hier, wir haben Vertreter des WWTF, Geschäftsführer des WWTF, Michael Stampfer ist hier, wir haben Kolleginnen und Kollegen hier, wir haben Alumni der Fakultät hier, wir haben frühere Dekane hier. Es freut mich ganz, ganz herzlich, dass Sie alle gekommen sind, um mit uns dieses besondere Jubiläum zu begehen. Let me also welcome you in English for our special guests. I would like to thank all of you for joining us in celebrating. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating 50 years of computer science at the University of Vienna and at the same time 20 years of the Faculty of Computer Science at this university. Now, it's a very special honor and pleasure to also welcome our rector, Sebastian Schütze, who was able to manage to come here despite his extremely busy schedule, and I would like to invite him to say a few words.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Dekan, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Studierende, es ist mir wirklich eine große Freude, ein paar begrüßende Worte heute hier sagen zu dürfen. Besonders begrüßen möchte ich natürlich auch unsere beiden Special Guests, die heute die Lectures halten werden, Professor Yvonne Rogers und Professor Daniel Reed. Es gibt tatsächlich was zu feiern, 50 Jahre Informatik, das ist ja schon mal was, und 20 Jahre Fakultät für Informatik ist, glaube ich, auch schon mal was. Die Fakultät konnte und wurde ja erst gegründet nach dem neuen Universitätsgesetz von 2002, aber sie hat sich, ich würde sagen, erwartungsgemäß dynamisch entwickelt. Heute über 200 Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeiter, über 2100 Studierende, und das sind ja nicht einfach nur große Zahlen. Von Zahlen allein haben wir noch nichts. Wichtig ist, wie sich die Informatik entwickelt hat und wie zentral die Informatik für die Universität Wien insgesamt geworden ist. Das hat natürlich auch damit zu tun, dass wir eigentlich in einem Zeitalter der Digitalisierung leben, dass große digital getriebene Transformationen eigentlich alle gesellschaftlichen Bereiche betreffen, aber auch das tägliche Leben von jedem von uns. Das heißt, da ist einfach wahnsinnig viel Bedarf, und vieles von diesem Bedarf fällt in die direkte Zuständigkeit der Fakultät für Informatik. Diese, sage ich mal, besondere Zentralität der Informatik heute im 21. Jahrhundert bringt natürlich enorme Herausforderungen und auch enorme Chancen für die Informatik mit sich. Die Informatik ist schlicht gefragt, um hier Grundlagenforschung einerseits, aber auch Lösungen in der praktischen Anwendung zu finden. Und ich denke, dass unsere Fakultät für Informatik gerade diese theoretischen Grundlagen und die praktischen Anwendungen sehr gut verbindet. Die Dynamik, die das Fach sowieso schon hatte, ist, glaube ich, noch einmal beschleunigt worden. Durch Ihnen wird das alles vorher bekannt gewesen sein, der normalen Menschheit wahrscheinlich erst so ungefähr im November 2022. Ich glaube, die Informatik insgesamt hat durch das, was im Bereich AI ab November 2022 in die große Öffentlichkeit hineingetreten ist, natürlich nochmal eine ganz andere Öffentlichkeit und eine ganz andere Dynamik bekommen. Und diese enormen Herausforderungen, die darin liegen, sind natürlich vielfältiger Natur. Man muss neue Lösungen finden. Es gibt viele neue Anwendungen, aber es gibt natürlich auch viele neue Fragen. Ja, ich nenne nur mal als ein Beispiel. Also einerseits sind wir begeistert von dem, was AI alles kann. Gleichzeitig braucht das Kapazitäten an Rechnerleistung und damit natürlich auch an Strom, die so ein bisschen in einen Zielkonflikt treten mit unserem Klimawandel und unserem Bedarf, genau da halt einzusparen. Also diesen Zielkonflikt, den werden wir so einfach nicht lösen, aber das ist, glaube ich, doch ein sehr interessantes und sehr wichtiges Phänomen, diese beiden großen Bereiche auch im Zusammenhang zu sehen. Anderes ganz wichtiges Thema, die das Thema AI, aber auch überhaupt das gesamte Gebiet der Digitalisierung betrifft, ist natürlich die Kehrseite des Ganzen, also Cyber Security. Ich habe gerade mit einem Kollegen vor ein paar Tagen mit einem Kollegen aus Paris telefoniert, also die Universität Paris, ich glaube Saclay, hat einfach keine Studierendendaten mehr. Ja, sie sind einfach weg. Und die gehen jetzt durch die Seminare und fragen die Leute, könnte man nochmal ihren Namen haben, wenn sie schon bei uns studieren. Also das sind natürlich riesige Probleme, die diese Digitalisierung auf der anderen Seite mit sich bringt. Informatik gibt es an ziemlich vielen Orten, logischerweise. Was das Besondere an unserer Informatik ist, würde ich sagen, ist die Tatsache, dass unsere Informatik eingebettet ist in eine große Volluniversität der Größenordnung und der Qualität der Universität Wien. Das heißt, hier ergeben sich ganz automatisch zwischen der Informatik und den vielen, vielen anderen Fächern, also diesem riesigen Fächerkanon, den die Universität Wien bietet, Schnittstellen und damit auch Kooperationsmöglichkeiten. Und unser Fächerkanon ist eben größer als an einer technischen Universität und ist auch deutlich größer als das, was so kleinere Volluniversitäten zu bieten haben. Also ich denke, im Bereich der Lebens- und Naturwissenschaften, aber auch in den Geistes- und Sozialwissenschaften, natürlich in den Wirtschaftswissenschaften gibt es da natürlich auch schon sehr viele Kooperationen, aber da denke ich, ist auch noch sehr viel mehr Potenzial. Und was ich vorhin schon kurz angedeutet habe, ich denke, unsere Informatik ist deswegen auch so zentral, weil sie diese beiden Gebiete, theoretische und praktische Informatik, miteinander verbindet. Ohne Grundlagenforschung geht es natürlich nicht. Da wollen wir auch führend dabei sein. Aber gleichzeitig ist es natürlich auch so, dass es sehr, sehr viele Gebiete über den ganzen Fächerkanon verteilt gibt, die jetzt, sage ich mal, zum Beispiel AI-Aspekte in ihre Forschungssettings integrieren wollen und müssen. Und ich glaube, da gibt es tatsächlich sehr viele Schnittstellen mit der Informatik, die wir noch intensivieren können. Eine große Rolle bei dieser Verankerung unserer Fakultät für Informatik im größeren Kontext der Uni Wien spielt natürlich der Forschungsverbund Data Science und wie sehr die Informatik schon verankert ist und potenziell in Zukunft sich vielleicht noch stärker verankern kann, sieht man, denke ich, auch an den spezialisierten Masterprogrammen. Also wir haben nicht nur Informatik an und für sich, sondern wir haben eben auch, und ich habe sicher was vergessen, Bioinformatik, Wirtschaftsinformatik, Data Science. Und wenn man guckt, wie viele Unter- oder Subgebiete es da gibt, die potenziell da auch noch interessant sein können, dann ist diese Liste sicher außerordentlich lang. Ich denke, es ist für die Informatik 20 Jahre eine sehr erfolgreiche Geschichte. Ich möchte mich auch noch mal bei Ihnen allen bedanken und vor allen Dingen bei denjenigen, die über die letzten 20 Jahre dazu beigetragen haben, unsere Informatik nach vorne zu bringen, sich weiter dafür einsetzen werden, sie noch weiter nach vorne zu bringen. Und möchte vielleicht zum Abschluss nur sagen, dass die Universität Wien auch insgesamt auf diesen Bereich großen Wert legt, auch in diesen Bereich weiter dynamisch entwickeln wird und kann auch an dieser Stelle, was ich heute Morgen schon bei unserer Auftaktveranstaltung gesagt habe, dass als Teil unserer zum Glück am Montag abgeschlossenen Leistungsvereinbarung für die Jahre 2025 bis 2027 als Teil des Pakets an Maßnahmen inkludiert ist, in Kooperation mit der TU Wien aufzubauendes gemeinsames AI-Zentrum sein wird, weil es unsere Überzeugung ist, dass in Österreich natürlich relativ klein im Verhältnis zu dem, was sich in der großen, weiten Welt tut zu dem Thema, aber dass es vernünftig ist, in Österreich auf die starken AI-Kompetenzen, die eben in Wien, an der Universität Wien und an der TU vorhanden sind, die ein bisschen zu kombinieren und aufbauend auf diese existierenden Stärken dieses Thema noch stärker auch in der Grundlagenforschung zu verankern. Also ich gehe jetzt nicht auf weitere Details ein, aber jedenfalls ist Teil der Leistungsvereinbarung in den nächsten beiden Jahren sowohl auf unserer Seite wie auf Seiten der TU und zwar koordiniert, sage ich mal, große international sichtbare Professuren plus auch Tenure-Track-Professuren dazu einzurichten, um dem Thema AI am Standort Wien eine andere Sichtbarkeit zu geben. Und die Hoffnung ist, bei einer solchen größeren Investitionen in die Grundlagenforschung dieses Gebiets dann eben auch den Standort Wien insgesamt sichtbarer, attraktiver und damit, würde ich sagen, mit Blick auf die Fakultät für Informatik auch noch besser ausbaubar zu machen. Und ich glaube, das ist für unsere Informatik eine sehr gute Nachricht, dass wir jetzt in diesem Bereich dann auch weiter investieren werden. Das ist, glaube ich, meine beste Nachricht heute und damit wünsche ich Ihnen allen noch einen schönen Festakt. Nochmal herzliche Gratulation zu der erfolgreichen Entwicklung der Informatik. Und das muss ein Rektor am Ende immer sagen, Klammer auf, ich muss mich schon dafür entschuldigen, dass ich nicht die Vorträge noch anhören kann, weil ich muss gleich noch was anderes eröffnen. Ja? Hat aber nichts damit zu tun, dass ich nicht sehr froh bin, dass Sie jetzt diese 20 Jahre Informatik hier in einem so schönen Rahmen feiern können. Und würde sagen, als Kunsthistoriker scheint mir, dass 20 Jahre Informatik in diesem historischen Festsaal mit ehemals vorhandenen Klimbildern zu feiern, glaube ich, auch eine gute Metapher dafür ist, wie sehr die relativ neue Informatik im Zentrum der Universität Wien angekommen ist. Also nochmal herzlich willkommen an der Universität Wien.
Thank you very much, Rektor Schütze. Half a century of computer science at the University of Vienna. Half a century, this is basically nothing in comparison to many other disciplines and faculties at our university, which is almost 660 years old. For example, I do not think that theology found it worth to celebrate their first 50 years at the University of Vienna. But these 50 years are a long time, considering the dynamics and the rapid development of computer science over these 50 years. This is really amazing. The opportunities have exploded. Think back, not too long ago, video conferencing, as we commonly do it today, existed only in science fiction movies. And there's a lot of computer science in video conferencing. Also, just a few years ago, nobody would have thought about using some software tool for producing a little speech like mine. Obviously, I'm referring to ChatGPT. So these are extremely exciting times for young faculty, extremely exciting times for all of us, and extremely exciting times for guiding the development of in such promising environments. The faculty started with very few professors in 2004 and has really developed nicely, has grown, has developed nicely over the last 20 years. And it's great to hear from Rektor Schütze that he also considers now this faculty, the computer science, at the center of the University of Vienna. We as a faculty, we're starting to explore all these unique opportunities which exist now in this environment that the University of Vienna provides, in this intellectually rich and also diverse environment of the University of Vienna. At the same time, we all know not only the opportunities have exploded, but also the challenges have exploded. And you will hear more about the current trends and about the developments by our guest speakers, who I will introduce later on. And this explosion of opportunities and challenges leads to the simple conclusion: we need to grow more. We need to grow more, we need to attract more young scientists, we need to attract more professors, to join us at the University of Vienna, and we are very thankful for the support of the Rectorate in these endeavors. We simply need to further build up more expertise to work on today's challenges, hand in hand with the outstanding scientists from the other disciplines of the University of Vienna. You can only make good decisions for the future if you understand well and learn from the past. Thus, before going to looking into the future with our guest speakers, let us get started with a more detailed overview of the history of computer science at the University of Vienna. Fluctuation, also in terms of people, is one of the defining factors of a university. But the consequence is that it's also very difficult to find people who can share personal experiences from the past. And thus, I'm extremely happy that our dear colleague Günther Haring, Professor Emeritus, who was also the founding dean of this faculty, has actually agreed to tell us some more about what happened over these 50 years and how we came to be what we are right now. Günther, please.
Magnifizenz, Spectabilis, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, als Gründungsdekan der Fakultät habe ich gerne die Einladung von Dekan Gansterer angenommen, Ihnen kurz etwas zu erzählen über die Geschichte der Informatik an der Universität Wien. Meine Ausführungen basieren im Wesentlichen auf einem Beitrag, den Karl Anton Fröschl und ich vor 10 Jahren für den Fakultätenband anlässlich der 650-Jahr-Feier der Universität Wien verfasst haben. Also nähere Details bitte dort nachzulesen. Beginnen wir in den 50er Jahren. In den 50er Jahren haben die rechenintensiven Anwendungsbereiche wie Statistik, wie Physik, wie Astronomie, Wirtschaftswissenschaften gesagt, na lasst uns doch einmal diese neuen Dinge, diese Computer oder diese Rechenmaschinen einsetzen, wir brauchen die unbedingt für unsere Arbeit. So hat sich auch unser damaliger Statistikprofessor Sagorov auf den Weg gemacht zur Rockefeller Stiftung, mit der er gute Verbindungen hatte, und gefragt, könnt ihr uns nicht einen Computer vielleicht spenden? Und dem geschah so. So kam die Universität Wien gegen Ende der 50er Jahre zu ihrem ersten Computer, das Datatron 250. Weit entfernt von Halbleitertechnologie oder Chip-Technologie. Das war ein Röhrenungetüm, ich glaube in der Grundausstattung mit 15.000 Röhren oder Ähnlichem. Die Programmierung war natürlich primär auf dem Niveau der Maschine und immer nur eine Person konnte zu einem Zeitpunkt dieses System benutzen. Daher waren auch in der Lehre oder in den Kursen hauptsächlich Benutzerschulungskurse und einfache Programmierkurse das Programm, was angeboten wurde. Aber es war zwar mühsam, aber es war herausfordernd, weil es neu war und weil es spannend war. In den 60er Jahren, auch dort war es im Wesentlichen weltweit dieselbe Tendenz. Haben sich höhere Programmiersprachen wie Fortran im technisch-wissenschaftlichen Bereich, COBOL im wirtschaftlichen Bereich und so weiter breit gemacht, um es zu erlauben, dass Problemlösungen auf einem höheren, also dem Problem näheren Niveau möglich sind. Die außercurriculare Lehre war nach wie vor fokussiert primär auf Benutzerschulung und auch methodische Betreuung, was die Programmiertechnik anbelangt, was Datenorganisation anbelangt, was auch die Numerik anbelangt. Ab 1968 hat dann die Universität Wien einen neuen Rechner bekommen, die IBM 36044, mit zwei wesentlichen Konsequenzen. Einerseits, die Anwendungsdisziplinen haben explosionsartig sich vermehrt und zweitens, es haben sich so langsam auch fächerunabhängige Lehrinhalte etabliert, wie Vorlesungen über Algorithmen, über Datenorganisation, Informationsstrukturen, über Prinzipien der Programmierung und Ähnliches. Also das heißt, es haben sich so langsam Bausteine für ein Curriculum entwickelt. Nun, die Grundlagen dann weiter wurden auf gesetzlicher Weise Ende der 60er Jahre gelegt und damit sind wir jetzt endlich im Bereich 1971 bis 1975, wurde 1971 die formalen Grundlagen für ein Informatikstudium gelegt. Na, die Grande Dame, die Universität Wien, hat sich davon relativ wenig berührt gezeigt. Wenn man in den Hochschulbericht 1974-75 schaut, dann waren von allen österreichischen Informatikstudierenden gerade einmal 5% an der Universität Wien. Aber es hat sich was anderes getan. Der vor kurzem leider verstorbene Gerhard Bruckmann kehrte von einer Studienreise nach Amerika zurück und hat gesagt, liebe Leute, es gibt einen Bedarf an anwendungsorientierten EDV-Fachleuten. Lass uns etwas probieren, nämlich eine angewandte Informatik zu kombinieren mit einem wirtschaftswissenschaftlichen Schwerpunkt. Und er fand in dem Betriebswirt Erich Leutelsberger und dem Numeriker Hans Stetter von der Technik kongeniale Partner für ein solches Unternehmen. Und das führte dann letztendlich dazu, dass im Jahr 1973 ein Studienversuch Betriebs- und Wirtschaftsinformatik eingerichtet wurde. Der erste Ansatz, sein Konzept hat noch geheißen Computerökonomik. Nur die Frage war, was ist denn das für ein Fach, die Informatik? Ist es ein formalwissenschaftliches Fach, ein naturwissenschaftliches Fach oder gar eine technische Disziplin? Naja, an der Uni Wien hat man das schnell verortet bei den geistes- und naturwissenschaftlichen Studienrichtungen. Nicht erfolgreich, muss ich dazu sagen, war Hans Stetter dann in der Initiative, auch eine Rechtsinformatik einzurichten. Die juridische Fakultät hat dankend abgelehnt, hat gesagt, da ist uns zu wenig Jurisprudenz drinnen und damit war vorläufig der Weg der Rechtsinformatik in Wien vorgezeichnet, nicht existierend. Nun, mit dem Sommersemester 74 ist ein wesentlicher Schritt passiert. Während bisher diese ganzen informatikbezogenen Lehrveranstaltungen irgendwo im Vorlesungsverzeichnis verstreut waren, bei den Naturwissenschaften, bei der Mathematik etc., kam im Sommersemester 1974 das erste Mal ein eigenes Kapitel, das Kapitel 29 Informatik vor. Das heißt, die Universität bekannte sich sozusagen zu ihrem neuen Kind und damit, und das ist auch der Grund, warum wir heute 50 Jahre feiern auch, wenn man einen Grund, man muss sich das immer so zurechtlegen, dass man weiß, warum man feiert. Das Jahr 1974 ist aber auch aus einer anderen Sicht interessant. Im Herbst hat der Physiker, war Aerofolforscher, Ottmar Breining, einen Brief an seinen Dekan Kommarik geschrieben und hat gesagt, passt auf, da am Karlsplatz tut sich was. Da gibt es ein neues Fach, da gibt es neue Professuren, da müssen wir auch was tun. Wir brauchen das für unsere naturwissenschaftliche Richtung. Nun, meine Damen und Herren, Neid ist immer ein fantastischer Dünger im akademischen Leben. Und so hatte also die Philosophische Fakultät einen Brief an den Senat, an den akademischen Senat verfasst. Und warum erzähle ich Ihnen das? Warum das? Weil das aus dreierlei Hinsicht meiner Meinung nach interessant ist. Erstens einmal hat man begründet in dem Brief, dieses Fach ist auch interessant und wichtig für die Lehramtsausbildung. Das heißt, man hat also vor 50 Jahren schon erkannt, dass Lernen und Lehren sich durch diese Disziplin und die damit zusammenhängende Technologie wesentlich verändern wird. Zweiter Punkt. Man hat vorgeschlagen, diese neuen Professuren, man hat 5 Professuren vorgeschlagen, in einem eigenen Zentrum zusammenzufassen. Ein eigenes interfakultäres Zentrum zu bilden, Informatikzentrum im Zusammenhang mit dem interfakultären Rechenzentrum. Das heißt also, hat man schon erkannt, was für eine Bedeutung die Informatik in ihrem Stellenwert hat in der Mitte des breiten Fächerspektrums der Universität Wien. Und dritter Punkt, das muss man sich irgendwie durch die Ganglien leicht rieseln lassen, man hat eine Professur vorgeschlagen für Informatik unter besonderer Berücksichtigung des Bibliothekswesens und der Dokumentation. Das heißt, also vor 50 Jahren hat man an der Philosophischen Fakultät bereits erkannt, dass der Charakter von Bibliotheken, der Charakter von Sammlungen, der Charakter von Dokumentation sich durch dieses Fach, durch diese Disziplin und ihre Technologien massiv verändern wird. Google hat sein großes Digitalisierungsprojekt 30 Jahre später, 2004, begonnen. Nun, ganz kurz noch zur Abrundung. Der Brief landet beim Akademischen Senat. Was macht der Senat? Richtig, man setzt eine Kommission ein, Informatikkommission. Nun, solche Kommissionen arbeiten sehr effizient, wenn es um die Erstellung von Wunschlisten geht. Daher hat man gesagt, die Universität Wien braucht nicht 5 Professuren, wir brauchen 10 Professuren für Informatik. Naja, jetzt 10 Professuren aufzuschreiben, ist nicht sehr reizvoll. Hat man gesagt, man braucht 3 Prioritätsstufen. Diese Kommission, und das muss ich Ihnen schon ein bisschen als kleine Schnurre erzählen, hat einen Fehler gemacht, auf die dann der Dekan der medizinischen Fakultät hingewiesen hat. In meinen Worten formuliere ich das so und sage, die Aufrechterhaltung des österreichischen Gesundheitswesens kann nicht garantiert werden, wenn die medizinische Informatik nicht die höchste Prioritätsstufe bekommt. Also man hat dann den Vorschlag korrigiert und meine Damen und Herren, es wird Sie nicht überraschen, in unserer Recherche haben wir über die Realisierung dieser Wunschliste nichts gefunden. Nun, die Situation personalmäßig war ein bisschen heikel. Sie hat sich ein bisschen gebessert, als 1976 Günther Wieneck auf die Statistik 3 berufen wurde. Er war ein Quereinsteiger, von der Chemie kommend, so wie ich von der Physik komme, von der technischen Physik. Aber er war von Anfang an ein anwendungsorientierter, interdisziplinär arbeitender Informatiker und hat daher beantragt, ich brauche eine Erweiterung meiner Venia auf Statistik und Informatik. Das hat er 1978 den Antrag gestellt und flugs innerhalb von 3 Jahren wurde es dann genehmigt auf Statistik und angewandte Informatik. Einen Punkt noch vielleicht zu dem Studium, zu diesem Studienversuch. Der hatte im Kern schon so etwas wie die Interdisziplinarität drinnen, nämlich ein interdisziplinäres Praktikum, ein 10-stündiges, wo man andere Anwendungsfächer hereingenommen hat, Wirtschaftswissenschaften, Rechtswissenschaften, Medizin, Psychologie, Soziologie. Und dadurch wurde durch diese breite Möglichkeit der Wahl- und Kombinationsmöglichkeit wurde das Studium höchst attraktiv. Weil jeder Studierende konnte sagen, na, ich hätte ganz gern das Wahlfach so und so zusammengestellt. Und natürlich hat das dann in der Folge, hat es 2 Folgen gehabt. Erstens einmal, man hat damit die prekäre Personalsituation im Informatikbereich kaschiert. Und zweitens, die Studentenanzahlen sind enorm gestiegen und haben noch mehr darauf hingewiesen, wie kritisch die Personalsituation in dem Bereich ist, die ein bisschen dann abgemildert wurde durch Habilitationen, die langsam gekommen sind, auch meistens von Quereinsteigern, Wirtschaftswissenschaftler, Statistiker und Ähnlichen. Dann wurde also 1982 ein Extraordinariat eingerichtet, besetzt mit Armin Joa, irgendwo da hier auch. und eine neue Planstelle für angewandte Informatik. (1984) wurde dann der Studienversuch praktisch zu Ende, war ausgelaufen und ersetzt durch ein volles, reguläres Diplomstudium Wirtschaftsinformatik. Das zwei interessante Aspekte hatte. Also erstens einmal war es wie immer, wie alle Sachen gemeinsam zwischen Technik und Universität Wien einzurichten. Zweitens, man konnte sogenannte Unterrichtsversuche einrichten. Das heißt, also es war die Möglichkeit, ein gesamtes Diplomprüfungsfach zu ersetzen durch eine andere Kombination von Lehrveranstaltungen. Dadurch war es möglich, Schwerpunkte zu setzen, die näher bei der lokal gegebenen Forschungsrichtung liegen. Man hat also eine forschungsgeleitete Lehre stärker unterstützt. In meinem eigenen Bereich haben wir zwei solche Bereiche gehabt. Einerseits Parallel Processing, was dann zur Gründung des Austrian Center for Parallel Computation geführt hat auch, und die Mensch-Maschine-Kommunikation, oder was wir heute noch hören, Human-Computer Interaction. Ich hatte also dann die Ehre, diesen neuen Lehrstuhl ab 1985 innezuhaben. Es ist ziemlich genau 39 Jahre her, dass ich die ersten Schritte in diesem Haus gemacht habe und war aber sofort mit massiven Demonstrationen der Technik und der Uni konfrontiert. Der Protest hat sich gerichtet gegen die mangelnde Ressourcenausstattung des Bereiches Informatik. Eine Demonstration, deren Wirkmächtigkeit auch vom damaligen Wissenschaftsminister Heinz Fischer, glaube ich, ein bisschen unterschätzt wurde. Aber was der Sukkus war letztendlich, man hat eine Planungsgruppe mit dem Ministerium gemeinsam eingerichtet und hat sich einfach mal angeschaut und gesagt, wie werden sich die Studentenzahlen entwickeln, was ist das Lehrprogramm, welche Anforderungen kommen und was ist die derzeitige Personalsituation, was braucht sie also dazu. Der damalige Leiter der Abteilung für Planung und Statistik war dann der spätere Sektionschef Jürg Höllinger. Man hat sich geeinigt, ein Ausbau in 2 Phasen. Ich brauche Ihnen nicht sagen, die Phase 2 ist nie zustande gekommen. Aber in der Phase 1 hat die Universität Wien 3 Professuren und 5 Assistentenstellen sofort bekommen. Das war also das Ergebnis dieser Demonstrationen. Nun, der Bereich 1986 bis 2003 lässt sich relativ leicht oder schnell abarbeiten. Diese erweiterte Personalsituation hat natürlich eine gewisse Zeit gebraucht, bis sich das konsolidiert hat. Die neuen Professoren sind irgendwo dann im Raum Wien untergebracht worden. Ich glaube, wir haben zum Schluss 8 oder 9 verschiedene Adressen oder Standorte gehabt für den Informatikbereich. Und daher zusammenhängend auch die Frage, wie strukturieren wir das Institut? Auch da hat es in den 90er Jahren verschiedenste Wechsel gegeben. Und 2000 ist auch das Lehramtsstudium Informatik eingeführt worden. Das war schon gar nicht mehr zum Erwarten. Wenn Sie sich erinnern, die Philosophische Fakultät hat für das Lehramtsstudium generell gesagt. Aber seit ich hier war, 1985, ist die Frage des Lehramtsstudiums Informatik immer wiederum als heiße Kartoffel zwischen Unterrichtsministerium und Wissenschaftsministerium hin und her geschoben worden. Aber 2000 war es dann endlich soweit. Und auch natürlich haben langsam die Kooperationen begonnen zu florieren mit den Naturwissenschaften, mit den Kommunikationswissenschaften, Psychologie und Ähnlichem. Und damit komme ich jetzt zum Bereich 2004 bis 2024. 2004 wurde also dann, wie auch Rektor Schütze gesagt hat schon, die neue Fakultät etabliert, eingerichtet, gegründet. Im Wesentlichen aber mit Argumenten und so weiter, die uns auch aus dem Brief der Philosophischen Fakultät aus dem Jahr 1974 auch schon bekannt waren. mit und auch im ersten Entwicklungsplan ist dieser Aspekt der Kooperation, der Möglichkeiten, des Potenzials der Kooperation der Informatik mit den unterschiedlichsten Disziplinen der breit aufgestellten Universität Wien zum Tragen gekommen. Und es war dann naheliegend, dass wir 2006 auch ein eigenes, von der Technik unabhängiges Curriculum entwickeln. Wir haben das immer genannt ein Blumenmodell, im Kern konzentriert auf Informatik-Lehrveranstaltungen und die Blätter waren dann anwendungsorientiert, seien das jetzt in der Bioinformatik gewesen, in der Medizin, in der Medieninformatik, in der Wirtschaftsinformatik und so weiter. Das hat also den Vorteil gehabt, dass das Modell sehr flexibel ist. Und was wir auch gehabt haben, so vorgesehen, so eine Einheit, die mehr den gesellschaftlichen Aspekt, also insbesondere auch ethische Aspekte oder Fragen in der Informatik diskutieren und ansprechen sollte. Das haben wir uns ein bisschen als Vorbild genommen, die ETH Zürich. Und der Studienplan war aber auch in zwei anderen Sachen noch, glaube ich, innovativ. Lange bevor es so etwas wie ein ST abgegeben hat, haben wir gesagt, lieber Freund, du kannst erst im 3. oder dann im 4. Semester weiter studieren, wenn du bestimmte Voraussetzungen aus den ersten beiden Semestern erfüllt hast. Auch das ist nicht auf unserem eigenen Mist gewachsen. Das haben wir also von der Universität Zürich abgekupfert. Und wir haben das, was im amerikanischen Raum durchaus üblich ist, nämlich sogenannte Vorleistungs- oder Vorbedingungsketten formuliert. Das heißt, Studierende konnten also gewisse Lehrveranstaltungen nur besuchen, wenn sie bestimmte Vorleistungen erfüllt haben. Das Thema Studierbarkeit war nicht das Thema. Wir haben damit reagiert auf einen Bericht des Rechnungshofes aus Anfang der 2000er Jahre, der gesagt hat, liebe Leute, eure Lehrplanung ist nicht gegeben im Wesentlichen, ist schlecht. Und hier in dem Studienplan 2006 haben wir gesagt, jeder, der diese Voraussetzungen erfüllt, dem garantieren wir aber auch einen Platz. So, nun, wie schon angesprochen, diese personelle Expansion führte aber natürlich auch zu einer räumlichen Zersplitterung. Daher war es mir auch ein Anliegen, möglichst ein neues Haus der Informatik zu bekommen. Das ist dann auch in der Währinger Straße 9 passiert. Dort ist dann die gesamte Informatik zusammengezogen worden. Und ich halte es auch ganz wichtig, dass man mit einem Studium, das man macht, mit einem bestimmten Fach durchaus auch räumliche Gegebenheiten verbinden kann. Und so wurde also dieses neue Gebäude, die Währinger Straße 29, im Jahr 2012 bezogen. Damit wären wir also in der Gegenwart angelangt. Sie müssen noch mal kurz ölen. Erlauben Sie mir zum Abschluss noch ein paar Anmerkungen. Erstens einmal die Informatik, wie es auch Magnifizenz Schütze gesagt hat, ist ein sehr dynamisches Gebiet. Im Laufe der Jahre, die ich jetzt so schnell überflogen habe, sind enorm viele neue Methoden die Quelle aufgetreten. Am Anfang waren es die Datenbanken. Günter Wienig hat sich sehr stark damit beschäftigt. Grafik, Blockchain, bis zum maschinellen Lernen heutzutage. Zweitens, die damit zusammenhängende Technologie hat sich und wird sich enorm schnell weiterentwickeln. Schauen Sie sich die Entwicklung des Internets an, schauen Sie sich die Entwicklung der Kommunikationstechnologie an, schauen Sie sich den Bereich der künstlichen Intelligenz an. Und dritter Punkt, diese Entwicklungen haben unmittelbare Auswirkungen auf Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft. Das heißt, unter anderem bestimmen die technischen Rahmenbedingungen unser Denken, Fühlen und Handeln ganz wesentlich. Man hört immer wiederum, soziale Medien zerstören die Demokratie, polarisieren die Gesellschaft, führen zu Verlust von Kontrolle. Und damit fördern sie Gewaltbereitschaft in Wort und Tat. Nein, meine Damen und Herren, es sind nicht die Technologie, die das macht. Das gibt der Technologie einen falschen Stellenwert. Es sind immer Menschen, die unter Verwendung dieser Technologien solche Ziele verfolgen. Technologien sind keine autonomen Entitäten, die heute schlafen gehen und morgen aufstehen und sagen, jetzt zerstören wir aber die Demokratie. Oder wie es Dekan Ganstra sagen würde, durch die Verwendung dieser Technologien können die dunklen Seiten der Menschen sehr leicht zum Vorschein kommen. Der Einsatz von Desinformation inklusive Deepfake und Ähnlichem ist schneller und billiger geworden. Die Verwendung derselben ist eine echte Bedrohung für die Zivilisation. Ich will jetzt gar nicht Kommentare von Pionieren der Informatikentwicklung, angefangen von Leonhard Kleinrock über Windsurf bis zu Tim Berners-Lee sagen, über deren Meinung zu der Entwicklung. Aber mit den neuen Technologien, Internet, soziale Medien und künstliche Intelligenz, sind wir noch abhängiger von Vertrauen. Und es stehen uns große gesellschaftliche Herausforderungen im Zusammenhang damit bevor. Und es besteht ein Bedarf an Programmen zur Entwicklung digitaler Kompetenzen und Medienkompetenzen, mehr als wir bisher gemacht haben. Da ist viel zu wenig geschehen. Und das hat jetzt auch vor 3 Wochen der Rat für Forschung, Wissenschaft, Innovation und Technologieentwicklung anerkannt, indem er in seinem Schreiben sozusagen an die zukünftige Bundesregierung sagt, unter anderem, wir brauchen ein durchgehendes Pflichtfach Informatik in der Schule. Ich bin mir nicht sicher, ob das die intelligenteste Lösung ist, aber der Weg sozusagen stimmt. Und jetzt komme ich kurz zurück zur Universität Wien. Wenn die Universität Wien ihr eigenes Leitbild folgen will, indem sie sich verpflichtet hat, zur Lösung gesellschaftlicher Probleme beizutragen, dann ist sie in diesem Bereich gefordert. Die Fakultät für Informatik kann das alleine und soll das alleine nicht machen, aber auch andere Disziplinen wie Psychologie, Philosophie, Sozialwissenschaften werden das nicht schaffen. Ein ideales Feld für Kooperation. Natürlich braucht es dazu Ressourcen. Meine Damen und Herren, wir müssen lernen, der digitalen Technologie bewundernd auf Augenhöhe zu begegnen, statt mit unbegründeter Euphorie oder Argwohn oder gar Angst. Es soll und darf keinen Raum oder Grund für digitalen Fatalismus geben. Das wertfreie Nachdenken über die gesellschaftsverändernden Folgen des Fortschrittes und mögliche Fehlentwicklungen sollte keiner stillschweigenden Tabu unterliegen. Mit einem Wort ein bisschen zurück zu dem Weitblick, den die Philosophische Fakultät vor 50 Jahren bereits gehabt hat. Aber diesmal vielleicht mit der Hoffnung auf Umsetzung. Oder ich fühle mich ein bisschen zurückversetzt in das Jahr 1750, als die Akademie von Dijon eine Preisfrage auslobte, durch deren Beantwortung Jean-Jacques Rousseau berühmt wurde. Und die lautete: Durch die Fortschritte in den Künsten und in den Wissenschaften werden die Menschen bessere? Kommen wir zu einer besseren Gesellschaft? Meine Damen und Herren, ich lasse Sie mit dieser Frage alleine und danke Ihnen für Ihre Geduld.
Thank you very much, Günther, for a very thoughtful presentation, very enlightening presentation. Thank you. So with this understanding of our past and some very interesting and critical thoughts, let's now look into the future. And we have two outstanding guest speakers. We are happy to welcome them here. And they will cover two important directions for us. So one direction, which is at the center of activities in this faculty, is the computing direction. And therefore, our first speaker now is Dan Reed. Dan Reed has lots of accomplishments. He advised me in my introduction, less is more. So I'll try to keep it small, but I have to mention a few things of his impressive CV. He formerly served as Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, also called Provost, at the University of Utah, where he is now a Presidential Professor Emeritus in Computer and Computational Science. He previously was a Professor of Computer Science at the University of Iowa, where he also served as Vice President for Research and Economic Development. And he has something which not many outstanding scientists have. He has experience in industry. So he served as Microsoft's Corporate Vice President for Technology Policy and Extreme Computing. And these are, of course, very important experiences which are rare in academia. In his position at Microsoft, he helped shape Microsoft's long-term vision for technology innovations in cloud computing, and also the company's policy engagement with governments and institutions. He was also the founding director of the Renaissance Computing Institute at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and had many other important functions. He also has served on many high-level advisory committees and advisory boards, including the United States President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, the President's Information Technology Advisory Committee, and he also served as chair of the United States National Science Board. He is a very kind person, and it's always amazing to have an opportunity to talk with him. And we are very much looking forward now to his talk on computing futures in a changing world. Dan, please.
Thank you for those kind words. That was a little more than less, but nevertheless, delighted to be here, and congratulations on 50 years. As the Dean mentioned, it is both a brief time, but in the arc of computing, it's almost a geological age, because profound changes have happened in a single lifetime, as my friend Günther has noted well. I want to talk about that change, and I want to pose really a few things. I want to talk about how computing is affecting our world. One can't talk about AI, anything about computing without talking about AI. The rise of big data, and some of the technical and social fears that change has engendered. And I want to leave you throughout this thought that computing as itself as an intellectual discipline is critical, but it has deep connections to the rest of our world. And I spent a lot of my career at the intersections of disciplines applying computing, and I want to leave you throughout this talk with the notion of Renaissance teams. The time when any educated individual could claim to know most of what's worth knowing is long since past. But teams together who bring their skills together can do things that no one of them can do separately. This QR code is the place where you can find these slides and some other musings if you are interested, but I'd welcome conversation afterward. So let me pose a question to begin with and ask you the following question. What created human civilization? And I would argue it's really two things. One is agriculture, because it allowed humanity to settle and cease to be a hunter-gatherer society. But I would also argue that the other might be writing, because for the very first time it was possible for us to accumulate knowledge and transmit it from generation to generation other than oral history. And we as scholars are the custodians of that ancient trust. We both preserve the human knowledge base, and if we're fortunate, we're blessed to add to it and pass it on to successive generations. And I would suggest humbly that there are only three basic questions in this world. There's life and nature, there's matter in the universe, and there's the human condition. And all things are specializations of that. And one of the great things about the explosion of knowledge is we know so much more about all of those things than we did even a handful of years ago. But one of the consequences of the explosion of knowledge has been the repeated speciation of subfields. And one of the consequences of that is we have often lost the ability to talk across those fields. Any of you who are scholars tried to read papers in another discipline and discover that you don't even know what all of the words mean? That's a challenge. And so how we bridge that gap and come together, as I said, is both a challenge and the opportunity around 21st century scholarship. The important thing is that computing has important roles to play in all of these basic questions. Now, in the early 1970s, I was a teenage boy in the southern part of the U.S., and at the library, a visitor gave us a large collection of a magazine called Scientific American. And it was science written for a non-science audience. I read every one of those issues, cover to cover. And another young boy about the same age as me, Steve Jobs, read the same issues. One of them was an issue that appeared in March 1973, and it was about a really interesting biological question. What is the efficiency of different animals and how they move? Walk, crawl, fly, all combinations of those things. And it looked at the efficiency of those things as a function of animal size and locomotion pattern. And then superimposed on the article was another interesting fact, the efficiency of a human on a bicycle. And it is more efficient than anything that nature has ever produced. And so Steve Jobs thought about that, and if you go Google it, you will find he spoke about it many times. It stuck in his mind. And his observation was that in computing, we're in the business of building a bicycle for the mind. Most of the machines that we build are about amplifying our physical capabilities. They're versions of the lever and complicated machines. The computer is an intellectual lever. It allows us to do things that we simply can't do intellectually otherwise. And so I want you to think about that broadly as we think about the future of computing, how we apply the intellectual lever. And as he said in this quote, it's the most remarkable tool that we've ever come up with. It's the equivalent of a bicycle for our minds. So in those 50 years, we have seen incredible change, and Gunther described some of those in terms of the faculty and the machines that existed from the days of mainframes to personal computers to ubiquitous mobile devices that seem glued to our bodies, and we seem helpless without them today. And at my age, I've seen most of that history. In fact, at one point, I told a young student, some like you, that I actually knew a statistically significant fraction of all of the people on the planet who had an email address. And the student looked at me with the same kind of shame that we reserve for the aged and the infirm. But it was true. It was a close-knit community, and we've seen that explosion of technology and its ubiquity and the way it has reshaped our world. And there are profound issues about how that has shaped the sociology of how we communicate, some good, some bad. It has transformed the way we do scholarship, of course, both in our ability to build models of reality, to analyze large amounts of experimental data, and of course the way we communicate and share information. And with the rise of AI, important questions about what that future is about. And if you're curious about what I looked about younger, that picture of me at the bottom, at one point I did have hair. It is true, and I'm sure Gunther did too at some point in his younger years. But it has changed how we think about scholarship, right? And here is a fundamental way. Think about the essence of the experimental method. You have a theory, a hypothesis, you construct an experiment, you collect some data to test that hypothesis, and you either validate it or you refute it, you revise it, and you try again. And so that notion of the experimental method, coupled with theory, our ability to build mathematical models to describe the world, was for a long time the essence of what science was about. And then along came computing, and our ability to build complex computational models of the world changed the way we think about science. In fact, it's no exaggeration to say that you can't do science without computing today. It's essentially impossible. And of course, the thing that's upon us now is the explosion of data. Throughout most of our history, data was rare, expensive, and difficult to acquire. And we've moved from a world where data was rare and expensive to we're drowning in data. And the late Nobel laureate Herbert Simon said, one thing that a plethora of data, an abundance of data creates is a poverty of attention. And so the challenge has moved from the data to how we find insight from it. And it's an important sociological change as well, because for many years, if I had a unique scientific instrument, I had advantage over you, because I could do things you could not. And now, with widespread availability of data, the power rests with who can ask better questions of the data. And that's a profound sociological change. So one of the things I want you to think about is this may be the most revolutionary time in computing in perhaps the last 30 or 40, 50 years. And that's an extraordinary thing to say given the number of revolutions we have seen in computing. But I want to tell you why in the following few minutes that I have. The fact that we have for most of the last 30 years assumed that computers would get smaller and faster, it's over, folks. It's over. I'm going to tell you why in a moment. But computing, because of its power and its ubiquity, has also become intensely geopolitical. The fact that we in the West are dependent mostly on the supply of semiconductors from Taiwan is a geopolitical risk for the entire Western world. There are profound geopolitical issues associated with the global influence of computing. Transistors don't get cheaper anymore. They're still getting smaller, but they're not getting cheaper anymore, and I'll show you why in just a second. But one of the implications is that the locus of innovation has shifted because of that. So those of you who are technologists, I want you to think about the fact of computing, not just through the technology lens, but to follow the money, to follow the culture, as well as the technology. And let me show you a couple examples of what that means. This is as geeky as I'm gonna get, so bear with me for just a moment. But this picture on the left shows what's happened to semiconductors. And they got faster and faster. So here's a little question for you. What's a straight line on a semi-log plot? It's an exponential, all right? It's a basic math question. So straight lines mean that these things were rising exponentially. Well, no exponential lasts forever, except in the textbooks. So as transistors have gotten smaller and smaller, we're now down to the point that you can almost count the number of atoms in a transistor. And there's a limit down there. And so part of what is happening is not that we're running out of ideas on how to make transistors faster, but it's getting more and more expensive. And we're going to run out of money before we run out of physics. Because you have to, here's where the technology intersects money. If you're going to build smaller transistors, you have to ask yourself, what products can I build and sell at enough volume that I can amortize the cost of spending 10, 20, 50 billion euros to build a facility, to create them. That's the economic place where technology intersects. The other, as I said, is most of our transistors, as this chart on the other side shows, are coming from Taiwan. There's almost no capacity in Europe, at least at the leading edge, and there's a declining fraction in the US. And so there are real issues about that. Now, there's hope that we will be able to move from the current state of the art, which is transistor features that are about 2 nanometers. Think about that. We're down well below the size of a human hair, and we're going below that. But there are possibilities of getting down to a handful of angstroms, but there are real challenges there. Here's the other way to think about this issue. So what I've shown on this picture are the market capitalizations of computer companies. And on the left, in the blue, they're all the companies that you would call a computer company. Intel, IBM, HP, Atos, Fujitsu, Cisco, AMD. All of them are small compared to both the Chinese hyperscalers, the so-called BAT companies, and the hyperscaler AI companies. The ones on the right have market capitalizations that are well in excess of €1 trillion or $1 trillion. And that's changing the entire sociology of the computing market. So those of you who are scholars, whether theorists or technologists, here is the real opportunity. Almost everything that has driven the computing revolution over the last 50 years is predicated on a single idea. The computing model that Johnny von Neumann and others created at the end of the Second World War, the so-called von Neumann architecture. That's running out of steam. So there are opportunities to think in different ways. And I challenge you to think in this way. There's a theory in psychology that has waxed and it has waned in its support called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And what it says is that language shapes how you think. And all of you who are multilingual realize that you form word orders in different ways depending on the language you speak, and there's slightly different nuances in the way you emphasize things. That's true about the way you think about computing as well. So I want to share one breakthrough that occurred literally this week. So what's this picture that's circling here on the right? It is the neuron connections of a fruit fly. It has about 140,000 neurons and over 50 million connections. Now, I want you to think about what a fruit fly can do. It can fly, it can walk, it can seek food, it reproduces, and it does so on an energy budget that's infinitesimal. It's an autonomous, goal-seeking entity. The amount of money and energy we're spending to build data centers to drive generative AI is measured in the hundreds of billions of euros and in gigawatts of power. If I stood here and told you I had a computing device on the edge of my finger that could do what a fruit fly does, every company in the world would be at my door. There is a lot we can learn from nature about intelligence that we have not begun to scratch the surface. There are real opportunities to think about alternative models of computing that draw on biology, that draw on alternative representations of many different things. And so the world that we have lived in for most of the 50 years is pregnant with possibilities about the future. So let me say a word or two about AI, and then I want to talk philosophy, and then I will be done. So what about this AI hype? And Lord knows it is out of control. So what really made it possible was the fact that we had a lot of data and we had enough computing power that many tasks that were previously believed to only be the domain of humanity became easily accessible for computing. So computers are better at recognizing images, better at recognizing handwriting, better at recognizing speech than the average human is. And that's what this little chart on the right says. But here's the thing to think about. If you talk to most people out in the general population, they believe that AI is magic. And it does look like that, maybe flawed magic, but magic nevertheless. But it's really only three things. It is a lot of data. It's the human digital knowledge base on the one hand. It's a lot of really fast computers. And it's the ability to multiply numbers. That's all it is, folks. And why it works is because if you have most of the human knowledge base, statistics is your friend. You can predict most things because they're usually an instance of something that's happened before. And that's both the opportunity and the risk, is how we think and manage that. Because there's not true broad general intelligence there. But there is huge power in the things that it does. And all of this rests on what's happened over the last 50 years. So the advance in networking, the advance in the speed of computers, the advance in computer graphics, our ability to build distributed systems in public clouds at massive scale, our ability to approximate things by virtue of neural networks, and the rise of search engines. All of those things are enabling technologies. There's no magic here. But it is true that if you have enough, that a qualitative outcome accrues from the quantitative effects. And that is the power of generative AI. Here are a couple examples. That fruit fly connectome that I mentioned, this is all done with AI. I mean, what do? They took electron micrographs of very thin slices of a fruit fly brain, which is only about the size of a grain of sand. And then they used AI to stitch it together with some human support. Wouldn't have been possible any other way because it's just too much data. Same thing on the other side, being able to digitally unroll a scroll from Pompeii and read it, possible because of generative AI. So it is having profound effects in both how we think about the arts and how we think about the sciences. And it has very practical effects. I won't go into this in detail, but I will give you an example. I spent a lot of my career working on weather forecasting. How do you build digital models that will take data and predict the weather? Well, if you take a lot of historical data of the weather, you can build an AI model that is better than any of the existing models, either the ones from the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasting, any of the other US models. It's highly accurate, it's very inexpensive. There's real power and there's opportunity there. But here's one of the cultural changes and challenges that I would say accrues from this dynamic. Almost everything we have done in scholarship and science for pretty much all of recorded history has been deductive based. We build models, we test those models with experimental data. AI is inductive reasoning, right? Think about it. If I have a mathematical model, I can test it with data. The other side is, here's a whole bunch of data. Show me if there's a pattern in the data. That's really what inductive reasoning is about. And there's a sociological collision that's taken place with those two worldviews. It's largely being resolved, but it's shaken many of the foundations of science. There's a great book by Thomas Kuhn who talks about the culture of scientific revolutions. And the truth is what he effectively says, though he doesn't say it in this way. The way new ideas take hold, old scientists die. There are transitions that occur when there's an impetus for change. Big data, as I said, is transforming the way we think about the world, both a small number of very large instruments and a large number of small ones. There are challenges here, though, because the scale of many of our scientific instruments are now approaching the limits of our political willingness to spend money to support them. You know, the political reality is we might spend up to maybe 10 billion euros to build an instrument, but it's hard beyond that. And we're seeing that in what's happening with the future of the Large Hadron Collider, but also in large-scale telescopes. All right, I want to end by talking about some of the cultural challenges, and Gunther alluded to some of these. So, what are the different worldviews about how technology change and AI are affecting our future? There's the scary part, and there's the opportunity part. So let me tell you a story. So this is a picture from about 12 years ago. I was in Brussels. As the dean said, I ran global technology policy for Microsoft, and I found myself debating the European Union's science advisor, Anne Glover. She's a Scottish microbiologist. Here I am, an American computer scientist. We're in Brussels. We're talking to a bunch of EU leaders about the future. I expected we were going to have culture clash between biology and computer science, but it became clear after about 5 minutes as Anne and I looked at each other out of the corner of our eye in a room not unlike this one, that there was absolutely no difference in our perspective. And what we were being asked by the audience over and over again was, how do we slow down change? How do we slow down change? And we said, you can't. You can manage it, and you can manage it wisely with thoughtful debate, but you can't stop it. And in her case, they were asking questions about genetically modified crops. In my cases, they were asking about technology and how it was changing a whole variety of things. And the answer is, you can't stop it, but you can manage it. What's critical to manage it, and this is sometimes hard for us in the technology space, is you have to talk to people. You have to share ideas, and you have to listen. And a lot of that speaks to how communication technology is challenging issues around privacy, around ethics, and around law. And all of us have seen how social media affect politics and voting know that there are real social risks there. It's important that we be engaged in this process and dispel fear that the technology is biased or magic. It just is, and we have to use it wisely. So I want to end with just a couple thoughts. We're in an uncertain world, right? The EU, Europe, the US, Japan, essentially the democratized world is facing new geopolitical challenges, perhaps unique in the last 20 years. There are global dependencies on goods and services that affect our way of life, and there are deep technical challenges in a variety of areas. And Lord knows we're facing deep social divides, right? And that is affecting our political processes and debates about our future. As technologists, we have an important role to play in that. We have to engage and talk to people about how technology can not only aid the future and not just disrupt the present. So leave you with this thought. We like to believe that we are the school at Athens, a group of dispassionate scholars who come together to collaborate and create new knowledge and pass it on to successive generations. Sometimes we are, but all too often we're the Tower of Babel. And if you remember the story from the Jewish tradition, the Tower of Babel, they were building a tower to the sky. And there's a quote from the Old Testament where God says, "The people are one, and this they do, and there's nothing they can imagine that is beyond them. Let us go down and confound their language." That speciation of knowledge, the cultural separation that comes when we lack a common shared understanding of issues, is deep and profound, and it affects how we think about the present and how we shape the future. So I'll leave you with this thought. There's a great little book written by the late Nobel laureate Peter Medawar called Advice to Young Scientists, but it's actually more relevant to anyone who seeks to innovate. And these are a few things I've learned over the years. You can take them for what they're worth. One of them is it's really important that you get out of your comfort zone and embrace people who aren't like you. They'll challenge what you believe, and they will teach you a lot. The other is take some risks. Dare the difficult. It'll stretch your imagination, and it's okay to fail. The third is figure out what you do really, really well, and go find other people who figure that out too. Because together, you can do something that neither of you can do separately. Implicit in that is you have to be good at what you do. So the core really matters, but the collaboration is important as well. And then something my grandfather used to tell me, make new mistakes, not the same old ones over and over again. Life's too short otherwise. Make new and original mistakes. Life's more interesting that way. And that, as Yoda would say, do or do not. There's no try. Do or do not. All right, thank you very much. I want to leave you with this last thought. The future really is here, but it's not evenly distributed. Part of our job is to help share that truth. And if we want a better future, you have to start with better dreams. Technology can create a better future, not just a dystopia. And we have to engage society and collaborate to do that in a way that educates, supports, and builds partnerships about the future. That, I think, is the exciting part about computing. It is central to all of these issues. It touches every aspect of our society. There's no other place I can imagine that does that in such a profound way. That's the opportunity for the University of Vienna faculty and students for the next 50 years. Thank you.
Worte. Nachdem der Dekan gerade beschäftigt war, Ihnen ein Geschenk zu überreichen, ergreife ich kurzerhand das Wort. Mein Name ist Peter Reichel, ich leite hier eine Forschungsgruppe Kooperative Systeme. Und wir sind hier, um heute auch einen Teil der Informatik zu repräsentieren, der mit der Anwendung zu tun hat. Informatik ist ja Theorie und Anwendung, haben wir gelernt von den Worten von Rektor Schütze. Und wir wollen Ihnen nun eine Anwendung demonstrieren, die im Rahmen unserer Forschungsarbeiten entstanden ist. Ich habe einen Postdoc, der sich damit beschäftigt, Plastiktöne beizubringen. Das hört sich zunächst mal kompliziert an, ist aber relativ einfach. Sie sehen hier vorne, wird gerade vorbereitet, einen Lego-Flügel, der aus 3500 Lego-Teilen besteht. Er sieht aus wie ein Flügel, er ist zu betätigen wie ein Flügel, nur er tönt nicht wie ein Flügel. Und besagter Postdoc hat sich zur Aufgabe gemacht, diesen Flügel zu sonifizieren, und es ist ihm also gelungen. Und wir haben dann beschlossen, wir würden das gerne demonstrieren und haben dazu glücklicherweise einen weltweit bekannten Experten für zu Recht vergessene Musik gewinnen können, uns ein Stück auszusuchen und aufzubereiten, das für dieses Lego-Klavier und ein Kammermusikensemble geschrieben ist. Der Komponist Oleg Stolter ist weitgehend unbekannt, also er ist eigentlich vollkommen unbekannt. Auch die Tatsache, dass sein Vorname Oleg und Lego gewisse Ähnlichkeiten aufweist, ist natürlich vollkommen zufällig. Und was das Besondere an dem Ganzen ist, Sie werden jetzt hier ein Ensemble von engagierten Informatikern und Informatikerinnen sehen. Also jeder Ton, der jetzt produziert wird, stammt aus einem Informatiker, aus einer Informatikerkehle oder aus einer Informatikerhand oder Informatikerinnenhand. Und das finde ich ganz großartig, dass wir tatsächlich an der Fakultät so hochbegabte Musiker haben, die in der Lage sind, auch wirklich qualitativ unglaublich Musik zu machen. Das ist also die Geschichte hinter diesem Stück. Es heißt Le Carnaval de Venise. Die Melodie wird Ihnen möglicherweise bekannt vorkommen aus einem alten Gassenhauer, der sich mit einem Hut und seinen 3 Ecken beschäftigt. Und wir werden das jetzt eben versuchen zu Gehör zu bekommen und damit auch eine Anregung von Professor Ried aufgreifen. Also wir gehen jedes Risiko ein, wir verlassen jegliche Komfortzone und jeder Fehler, der hier passiert, wird wirklich neu und originell sein, weil das ist tatsächlich eine Welturaufführung jetzt. Und ich darf meine Kollegen und Kolleginnen jetzt auf die Bühne bitten und Sie hoffentlich um einen freundlichen Auftrittsapplaus, dass wir dieses Risiko eingehen.
One highlight after the other. Who would have expected that attending a ceremony of a computer science faculty, right? So this is wonderful, I think, and all these, as Peter mentioned, all these persons, all these people are computer science faculty students, so I think this is really amazing. And that brings us actually to our second speaker. As we all know, fortunately, the human has gotten much more attention now, the human component in all the computing, because we notice that what we developed may have or does have a profound impact on humans. And that, of course, nurtured the thought, well, we need to think more integrated. We need to think more about the human component in all this. And human-centered computing is one of the focus areas of the Faculty of Computer Science. And therefore, of course, we also were looking around for finding someone who would also be able to give us a nice talk related to that area. And we were lucky. We could convince Yvonne Rogers to join us today. She's a professor of interaction design and the director of the Interaction Center at University College London. She's also the deputy head of computer science there, of the Department of Computer Science. She has received numerous awards. She's an extremely prominent figure in her areas, among those the ACM SIG CHI Lifetime Achievement Research Award. She has been elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society. She received the Royal Society Robin Milner Medal and the MRC Suffrage and Science Award for being one of the leading women in mathematics and computing. And she also holds a Chair of Excellence from the University of Bremen. And last but not least, just recently, she received one of the highest international honors in engineering. She has been elected to the US National Academy of Engineering. So we are extremely blessed to have her here today. She will talk to us about how can HCI meet AI in the eye. Yvonne, please.
Vielen Dank, guten Tag. That's it for my German. It's a great pleasure to be here in Vienna, and particularly to celebrate the anniversary of the computer science 50th years in being. And today, as was mentioned, I'm here to talk about how humans are part of this equation as we advance computing. And my title is, How Can Human-Computer Interaction Meet AI in the Eye? And it's following on from the previous talk to think about how we can collaborate with different disciplines. So I'm sure many of you know now what artificial intelligence is, and we heard from Daniel a brief history of how it came into being. In a nutshell, we are building computer systems that exhibit intelligence. And perhaps the most well-known is computer chess, but also those of you who use Netflix or Spotify, the recommenders behind that use AI to decide what you might want to listen to or to watch. And then we heard from the rector about what happened in November 2022 when generative AI came into being. And it's essentially a form of AI that trains on masses of data using large language models to create new content. And this can be text, human-like text, images, music, not the music we just heard, but it has been able to generate some quite original music. And AI has often been motivated, people who are involved in developing it, to automate many human tasks. And the reason for this is that we as humans are fallible. We make mistakes, we make errors, but computer systems never make mistakes if they're developed and designed properly. And so much of the motivation behind AI is to try and come up with systems that can replace the fallible human. My area of research, however, disagrees with this and thinks that perhaps we should be thinking about how we can work with, humans can work with computers in order that we can complement and augment each other. And human-computer interaction, for those of you who aren't familiar with this discipline, is essentially about designing computer systems or interactive products to support the way people communicate and interact in their everyday and working lives. So it's very much about thinking about what we as society do and how we can design technology to support us. So why in the world would we want to bring these two disciplines or fields together? Human-computer interaction, all about people, and computers, all about automation or AI. And I would argue, along with some of my colleagues, that it's about widening the AI agenda from being largely technical to serving the needs of people. And we heard in the previous talks, we want to empower humans, and we want to address societal challenges. And also we want to think about how we can develop responsible algorithms. So back in 2019, this subfield of human-centered AI came into being. And it largely was, there were lots of people working in it, but the first to really get some funding behind it was Stanford University, where AI researchers came together with human-computer interaction researchers and came up with the Stanford HAI Center. They have some very cheesy videos, if you're interested, about what we can do by building human-centered AI. But essentially, what they've been promoting and pushing is to design and create AI applications that can augment human capabilities. Within Europe, I've been part of a network that's been called Humane AI, and there are about 50 or 60 partners across Europe in industry and academia who've worked on trying to think about how we can humanize AI. And again, similarly, having the mission of developing human ability to make more informed choices, to develop robust, trustworthy AI systems that can understand humans, and build them so that they can appropriately interact with humans in complex settings. And as was mentioned before, thinking very much about the ethical issues of the impact of AI on society. One of my colleagues in the US, who is a computer scientist, Ben Schneiderman, has spent many years writing about human-centered AI. And he had a book came out in 2022, and he argued that we should be grounding AI in human values to do with decency and compassion. But he also argues that we should be moving away from autonomy towards developing what he calls super tools. And super tools are tools that enable us as human beings to carry out our tasks beyond what we would normally do by ourselves. And he also is a very strong advocate of arguing that humans should remain in control of our complex systems, whether it's nuclear power plants or planes or automobiles, rather than autonomous systems taking over. So there are two sides of the argument. Should we be going for autonomous systems, or should we be developing these super tools? I think the way forward for those of you who are interested in human-centered AI is to think about this in a number of different lenses. And my own research, which I'll mention a couple of studies, is thinking about how we can design new interfaces, new interaction techniques by which we as humans can interact with the new AI. And this might be looking at how much agency to give to humans and to give to the system, how much control, and what kinds of ways should we be interacting? Should we be using chatbots or avatars or prompts or multimodal AI or virtual reality? There's a whole different set of interfaces we can design by which to interact with it. At the next level, I think we need to work together with AI researchers, but also those in the social sciences and philosophy and socio-technical systems to think about developing new policies by which to develop responsible AI and explainable AI. AI that isn't black box, but can explain how it works. And then we need to, as mentioned, address societal concerns about the future of AI. Not the existential angst, but other ones. And I think one of the ones that I think is concerning the media and journalists in particular is Gen A taking over our lives and our jobs. Well, we've heard, and I'm sure you're all familiar, that the GPT tools can do many knowledge-based tasks now that were previously done by humans. And I'm sure you've all used them in some way. Who hasn't used ChatGPT yet? Okay, one or two of you. Well, good for you. It can create text as copy if you're in the newspaper industry, produce code, write essays, blogs, reports, summarize main points from meetings and documents. And now you can generate new film scripts, music and videos. You can design websites and graphics. And now they're claiming that they can help us to think, to sort out our muddled thoughts. And sometimes I wish I had something like that, because my thoughts do get a bit muddled. But all of this, what this suggests is it can save us an awful lot of time and a lot of what I'm calling digital drudgery in our lives. But what's the danger if it takes over all of these tasks? We become over-reliant on the generative AI. And if this is the case, we can get awfully lazy, and we may not take the initiative to learn or to work. If we know that the AI can do it for us, why bother to do it ourselves? No one really knows. It's still very early days, and I think we need actual research to show what the long-term effects are of having these tools to be able to take over our lives. My own thoughts, and I'm a very much a half-glass-full person, is that this won't be the case. We will continue to learn and to work. It will just change the way in which we do that. But for now, I think one of the things within human-computer interaction is to think about the interactions and the interface. I think Gen AI what it's done is it's provided a new paradigm for computer science to think about. And in a nutshell, what it's done is the user no longer tells the computer what to do at the interface. When you're using a graphical user interface, you use icons and a mouse and menus, and you select. You're telling the computer, you want to do this, you want to do that. Now, it's all very different with generative AI. The user tells it what outcome they want. And how do they do that? You type a description into a prompt box and wait to see what the system will do. And that's a very different way in which you interact with the technology. So, just to give you an example, Yesterday, I typed into ChatGPT 4.0, draw a new logo for the computer science department at the University of Vienna. Well, you're all familiar with the University of Vienna's logo, and there's one just there. What do you think it came up with? Isn't that terrible? It looks like a chip design. So I said to ChatGPT, I said, can you make it simpler and cleaner and add computer CS to it? And this is what it came up with. I'm not sure that's any better, but you see the point. You can keep asking it things and it changes it and it's not quite what you want. And you can spend ages refining or changing your prompt. If you're a designer, you wouldn't work like that. You'd have a very different approach to coming up with new logos. But anyway, I use this to illustrate that whilst prompt engineering is impressive, it has a number of drawbacks. In that user is less in control. They have to generate the input instead of the interface providing cues, like drop-down menus about what to do next. And for many tasks, like designing the logo, it can be difficult to generate the right prompt or the right terms, and it may need a number of different attempts. And for the first time, it can be fun. I'm sure the first time you used one of these ChatGPT tools, it was quite impressive, and as we heard, it can feel like magic. But it can be time-consuming and very frustrating. And the output, as we saw with that logo, is it can be stylized and all too formulaic. So how else might we interact with new AI tools? How might we design new interfaces rather than just using natural language prompts? This is AI Nexus suggesting we might have a shared tabletop surface with all sorts of interactive visualizations by which teams of people can work together using different AI tools. And that's one way forward. But what I want to say is to think differently about how we go about designing tools. So Daniel talked about whether we can design technology, computers to slow down, and he said, no, we can't. What about if we ask whether we can design technology to slow humans down? And that's my approach, which is going against the grain of what most software developers do. So software is usually designed to speed up how we work. So here's some examples. One here, ClickUp, even claims, it says, if you use my technology, I'm going to save you 1 day every week, guaranteed. And most people think that's wonderful, 4-day week. But lots of these project management tools and databases, it's all about saving time, making things quicker, faster, easier, efficient. One way in which they do this is the use of filters. So you have at the interface, you can go click, 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 and then up pops a dashboard. And then you can go unclick, unclick, click, 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 unclick, click, and then it will just come up with another dashboard and show you different predictions and so on. It's speeding up the way in which we think about things. But what if we slowed us down? What would happen? And that's what I've been working on. And I'll briefly touch upon 2 projects where I think there are huge benefits of using technology to slow human thinking down. And the first study I'm going to mention is how we might use the AI to probe our thinking when we're doing a task. And the task that I'm interested in here is making sense of data. If you're not a data scientist, when you see a dashboard or you see lots of graphs, it can be confusing. You don't really know how to make sense of it. Supposing the AI could help us to make sense of it. And that's where slowing down our thinking can help. So the study I'm going to talk about is some work I did with some colleagues of mine at UCL and also Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is a hospital in London for children who have rare diseases or who are very, very ill. And they, over the last 10 years or so, have been collecting loads and loads of data, like any other hospital. And so they've got massive data about these rare diseases, about different practices. The problem is they don't know what to do with all of this data. And they want to be able to help teams of clinicians who don't have time to go on data science courses to be able to look at the data and think about it in a different way and make sense of it in order to progress with their diagnosis and so on. And so we were asked to work with Great Ormond Street Hospital to come up with a way to help these clinicians to make sense of data. So if you look on the right, this is a typical graph. What does that bit mean down there? And what does it mean where a trend is dipping here? It's not necessarily clear to even data scientists. So we developed a system called Visi, and the idea is that we have an agent at the interface that can be proactive. And this agent is a voice, or it can be text, and it will prompt teams of clinicians at certain points when they're looking at data visualizations, when they appear to be stuck. And we thought a lot about how to do this, and we did this by getting the prompt to ask open-ended questions. And these questions are things like, do you need a hint for analysing X? What do you think of this? Shall we move on? Did you consider the difference between variable X and Y? What might have caused the sudden spike? And the point of these questions is to kind of just maybe shift their thinking or to guide them to look at a particular point on the visualization. So this is the sort of setup that we had. We had a shared big display of data sets here, and our agent would speak to teams through the speaker here and might say, do you need some help? Or have you thought about looking here? And so the idea is that the agent would sit there mainly being quiet, but occasionally would prompt the team to think differently. And the team could ask the agent to show different types of visualizations. So in the spirit of doing human-computer interaction research, we didn't develop this AI system because it would take a long time. We used what's called a Wizard of Oz study, where we have a human pretending to be the AI and prompting groups of participants when they appear to be stuck. And we compared different ways of interacting with our agent, whether it was using voice, whether it's using text. And we had certain rules by which Visi did the prompting. And it was whether there was a silence for a few seconds or the team hadn't discussed a pattern on the visualization appearing. And there's lots of details about the experiment that I don't have time to go into. But what we found is that using this way of prompting just sparingly encouraged the team to generate between them more hypotheses about what the data meant and what the trends they were seeing in the data represented and what was causing them. And it did this by focusing them on the causes behind the different ways the lines increased in the graph. Now here's one quote I really like, which is, I like that the questions were on finding out more about the data. By answering the question, or even by looking at it, you would think about the consequences. And then you would ask yourself, why is this line more steady than the other, which wouldn't necessarily happen without the assistant. So there's an example where we tried to slow down, I mean not slow down, but slow down their thinking through prompting using the AI. And we think it was very effective. Okay, my second study that I'm briefly going to talk about is how we can use AI to scaffold our thinking to help people make more informed decisions. This is a different domain, different context, which is investing. During COVID, something strange happened, is that people had a lot of time on their hand, and many people downloaded apps, trading apps, and started dabbling in investing. And over 130 million people in 2023 have started to use these apps. I'm sure some of you out there, I'm not going to ask, have used them. The most popular is Robinhood, and you may have a few €100 or you may have a lot more. But many people new to investing started using these apps, and it made some costly mistakes. And our question was, how can we help them not to make those mistakes? And how can we slow down their thinking so they don't act too rashly? So this is what happens sometimes. You go onto your app, and you see this is your investment, it's going nicely, and then suddenly, what do? Well, most people panic. They get very emotional. This is my money, I'm losing it, what am I going to do? They sell too fast, much and too much, and then they regret it later because often it will go back up again. And they don't have a good strategy to deal with this situation. So what we wanted to do was to think about how we might help novice traders think a bit more about what they're doing and to be more systematic and more methodical when doing their trading. And the way in which we do this is to get the AI to help them to question what their intentions and their intuitions. Doing it by yourself can be quite difficult, especially under stress. If you're a professional trader, you've developed the tactics and you've developed a voice of reason and you have a set of questions and criteria that you use before you make a decision. And that's what helps them from making too many rash decisions. But beginner traders don't have that. And what we wanted to do was to develop this tool that would help train up novice traders to learn that skill of being able to reflect and think about why you're doing something. So we designed a prototype to scaffold novice thinkers' thinking, and we used a chatbot as the intervention, and the idea was to stop them from acting impulsively and to think about what they're doing. So here's some thoughts here of what might be the trader, and here is the chatbot asking them to think about what they're doing. And the idea is to encourage this interior monologue to be more systematic. So this is the prototype we developed. It was called TradeBot, and here's the chatbot in the middle. Over to the left, you can see the different types of trades that you might be interested in investing in, companies, and then it can show you over on the right how they've performed over the years. And then occasionally the chatbot would appear to get them to think about what they are doing. So the aim of our research was to probe these novice traders about their intentions and to help them work through their hunches that may be poorly formulated. And to do this by popping up at key moments when the user is about to make a trade, and to promote short conversations with the user to stop, think and reflect. And importantly, this chatbot was embedded in the software that we developed for doing the trading, so that you could switch between doing the trading and doing the thinking. Again, there's lots more that we have written about how this works and the method and the experiments we've done. But we ran a user study to begin with, 6 traders, and we presented them with different scenarios where they had to make different decisions about investing, whether to sell or whether to buy. And then we got them to do what's called a think aloud method, where they had to talk about what they were doing and why. And this was followed up by in-depth interviews. And very quickly, the findings we found was that it did make them stop and think at key moments so that they didn't make those rash decisions. And importantly, it encouraged them to reflect at a certain point on their decision-making. Why am I trying to sell this now? What was my motivation for buying this stock in the first place? And it also helped to reduce their impulsive actions. So in a nutshell, I think this approach to thinking about designing AI tools not to take over the job or to recommend, but to just try and prompt you to think slightly differently can be very effective. And it can help the novice investors' thinking to be more systematic. But when we talk to more experienced traders, they said it's really annoying. It's a bit like, those of you who remember Clippy, it was a Microsoft product that would appear and say, I think you're wanting to write a letter, do you need help? And so we have to be really careful not to design these proactive agents to be annoying and get in the way. They have to be designed to be just so and just at the right moment that they're useful. And that's what we've been looking at, is how to design these proactive AI agents to enhance and to slow down human thinking where it's appropriate. So to finish off my talk, what's next for human-computer AI or human-centered AI? I think there are many different directions that we can go in, and we are continuing our research, looking at how we can design AI tools to augment human thinking, human reasoning, human sense-making, and it's a very fruitful area of research. But what if we could go one step bigger? Supposing we could think about how to design AI in very, very large, complex settings. Perhaps it could be a United Nations meeting or UNESCO or a COP28 discussing climate change. How could we help these large groups of people who come from all over the world to come up with new policy, new governments, new agreements, and even come up with peace? Could Gen AI help at certain junctures, and if so, how? I don't have the secret, but I do think, just like was said, thinking out of the box, daring to think differently, we might be able to think how we could use generative AI in these very complex human settings. And to help overcome the impasses, those of you who work in very large committees know that there's often impasses, that you just can't get over some issue. There's trade-off, there's disagreements. How do you get through those? And maybe the AI can help to them to think differently or to think together, to come up with agreements. Maybe they can break down groupthink even and be proactive in this, trigger new trains of thoughts. Who knows? But the idea here is to help these very large groups use different, maybe even teams of AI tools to think differently, to progress with solving problems. So in sum, my research has been very much about how we can think of human-computer interaction, and the topic of the talk today was how can it meet AI in the I, where the I is interaction. And it can do this. It can frame new research questions that focus on how to augment humans. There are many different ways we can think of that, but to encourage us to think and reason more rather than to become lazy. And we can design and test new kinds of interactions and interfaces for AI. I think there's an awful lot more than just prompt engineering. And we can begin to start to address some of these big societal challenges that are looming in front of us. So to finish off, I want to think more broadly about computer science, given this is the anniversary of the computer science department here in Vienna. And so how can computer science meet in the I being the interaction? So I've talked a bit about human-computer interaction and human-centered AI and what we can do to help augment humans. But there are lots of other ways and domains that can be involved. So one where there's a lot of research going on at the moment is between medicine, neuroscience, psychology, this new area called digital health, and AI is part of that. So thinking a bit about how these different disciplines can come together in order to move forward. There's also others, and I've just mentioned briefly about how computer graphics and VR and AI can help the creative industries. So why do we want to do this? Why don't we just let the different disciplines stay in their own areas and work on them? And the reason is that I think interdisciplinary research, and we heard previously, leads to new discoveries and solutions. And I really, truly believe that's the way forward. And so here's to the next 50 years of computer science and what they can discover at the University of Vienna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. The program says concluding remarks. So concluding remarks means most and above all, thank you. Thank you to all of our three speakers for these wonderful talks, for very inspiring talks. I think we got lots of interesting thoughts. Thank you to all of you who made it to this event, who joined us in celebrating. Thank you to all of our musicians. We will hear them once more, so one piece is left. And it's really amazing how much effort they put into this. I'm really, really thankful. Thanks a lot to all the people who have worked behind the scene in the Dean's office. Events like these require a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, and this is simply impossible if you don't have an extremely reliable team who helps doing all this and who takes care of all this. So I'm also very grateful to them, especially to our faculty manager, Werner Schröttner, who always is in the back, keeping everything together, making sure everything works. So, great thanks. We will conclude our ceremony here with a last piece of music, And after that piece of music, I'm very much looking forward to welcoming all of you to the buffet here in this direction and continuing with more informal discussions. Thanks a lot, and to the next 50 years of computer science at the University of Vienna. Thank you.
Ich habe vorhin in der Eile des Gefechts ganz vergessen, den Solisten vorzustellen. Das ist Dr. Hödel, der das Instrument gebaut hat, und er hatte heute einen sehr heftigen Tag, weil um 9 Uhr war sein Habilitationsvortrag. Also er ist seit kurzem nicht nur Doktor, sondern auch Privatdozent dieser Universität und hat vor ein paar Tagen sowieso eine Professur in Hagenberg angetreten. Und jetzt trommelt er. Wir spielen noch ein letztes Stück von Johann Strauss, eine Polka, die heißt Entweder oder. Entweder oder ist für die Informatiker ja auch ein sehr grundlegendes Konzept. Wir nennen das Exclusive OR oder XOR. Und ich finde es interessant, dass der Strauss genau zu diesem Thema etwas geschrieben hat. Wieder sind die Fehler alle komplett original und neu, weil nie gemacht. Wir werden sehen, was passiert.